She joked that he didn't like women, until the millionaire made her scream with pleasure. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The worst kind of trouble starts with laughter. The Seattle rain drummed against the 42nd floor windows of Nexus Tech, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the Tuesday afternoon chaos. In the sleek break room, the coffee machine gurgled like an old friend sharing secrets, and Rainey Brooks stood beside it, her rich brown skin glowing under the warm LED lights. At 27, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that made people pause. High cheekbones, expressive dark eyes that danced with mischief, and natural hair styled in elegant twists that framed her face perfectly. "Girl, you're telling me he's been here 2 weeks and hasn't even made eye contact with anyone?" Rainey's voice carried that melodic quality that made even complaints sound like music. She stirred her coffee with theatrical flair, her burgundy blazer hugging her curves as she gestured animatedly. Jasmine, her closest friend at work, leaned against the granite counter, her auburn curls bouncing as she nodded vigorously. "I'm serious. Cold as Alaska. My friend in accounting tried to introduce herself yesterday, and he literally just nodded and walked away." "Maybe he's gay," suggested Mika from marketing, pushing her glasses up her nose. Rainey threw her head back and laughed, that genuine, unfiltered laugh that could fill a room. "Honey, look at him. 6'2" of pure male perfection walking around here like he owns the place, which technically he does." She took a sip of her coffee and grinned wickedly. "But seriously, the way he completely ignores every woman here. Either he's gay, taken, or—" She paused for dramatic effect, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow still projected across the room. "He just doesn't like women at all. I mean, come on, have you seen him look at anyone? The man's like a beautiful ice sculpture." The other women dissolved into giggles, and Rainey basked in the attention, her confidence radiating outward like warmth from a fireplace. She'd always been the entertainer, the one who could find humor in anything, who could make the mundane feel magical with just the right words and perfect timing. "Maybe he's just intimidated by strong, beautiful women," Jasmine added, winking. "Please," Rainey scoffed, setting her mug down with a gentle clink. "I bet if I walked into his office right now and asked him to dinner, he'd probably—" The words died in her throat. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of expensive leather shoes against marble flooring, the kind of footsteps that spoke of custom-made Italian shoes and a man who moved through the world with absolute authority. Her friends' faces transformed from amusement to horror in real time, their eyes widening as they stared past her shoulder. No, 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 no. Rainey's heart began a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she slowly, so slowly, turned around. Ashton Hale stood 3 feet away, his tall frame filling the doorway like he'd been carved from marble by a Renaissance master who had a thing for devastating good looks. Dark hair, perfectly styled, steel-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense, and a jawline that could cut glass. His charcoal suit fit him like it had been tailored by angels, and his presence commanded the room without him saying a single word. Those steel-gray eyes met hers directly, and Rainey felt her soul leave her body. He'd heard everything, every single word. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, electric and dangerous. Rainey could feel her cheeks burning, her usually quick wit completely abandoning her when she needed it most. Behind her, she sensed rather than saw her friends melting away like ice in summer, leaving her alone to face the gorgeous tsunami of her own making. Ashton's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in those gray depths. Amusement? Annoyance? She couldn't tell, and that terrified her more than outright anger would have. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Interesting theory," he said, his voice deep and smooth like aged whiskey, with just a hint of something darker underneath. His gaze held hers for another heartbeat that felt like an eternity, and Rainey swore she could feel the air between them crackling with an energy she didn't understand. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded into nothing. Rainey stood frozen, her coffee growing cold in her hands, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the entire building could hear it. "Oh my God," Jasmine whispered, from somewhere behind her. "You're so fired," but Rainey barely heard her, because as Ashton had turned to leave, she'd caught something in his eyes, something that made her stomach flip and her skin tingle with awareness. He hadn't looked offended. He'd looked intrigued. What had she just gotten herself into? Some mistakes change everything, especially when they're not mistakes at all. The next morning arrived wrapped in Seattle's typical grey embrace, but Rainey felt like she was walking through a fever dream. She'd barely slept, replaying that moment in the break room over and over, until her brain felt raw from overthinking. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those steel-grey depths looking at her with something that definitely wasn't anger. But what was it? Standing in front of her bathroom mirror, she applied her lip gloss with trembling fingers. The woman staring back at her looked put together, navy wrap dress that accentuated her curves, natural hair swept into a sophisticated low bun, minimal makeup that highlighted her warm brown eyes. But inside, she felt like a live wire, buzzing with nervous energy she couldn't shake. "Get it together, Rainey," she whispered to her reflection. He probably forgot about it already. Rich CEOs don't have time to obsess over random employees making stupid jokes. Except the way he'd looked at her didn't feel random at all. The Nexus Tech lobby buzzed with its usual morning energy, coffee-clutching employees hurrying toward elevators, the gentle hum of conversations blending with the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. Rainey forced herself to walk normally, even though every instinct screamed at her to either hide in the parking garage or march straight to HR and confess everything. She was reaching for her security badge when she heard it, that now familiar sound of expensive Italian leather against marble. Her heart stopped. Ashton Hale emerged from the executive elevator, looking like he'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine. Today's suit was navy blue, perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was styled with just enough casual perfection to look effortless, and when he moved, there was a fluid grace that spoke of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. Rainey tried to blend into the crowd, but their eyes met across the lobby like magnets finding their match. Time seemed to slow. Instead of looking away or ignoring her entirely, which would have been the merciful thing to do, Ashton's gaze lingered. His grey eyes swept over her face with an intensity that made her skin tingle, as if he was memorizing every detail. There was something different in his expression today, something warmer and infinitely more dangerous than yesterday's cool observation. Was that interest? Before she could analyze it further, he began walking in her direction, not past her, not around her, directly toward her. Each step was deliberate, purposeful, and Rainey felt her breath catch in her throat. "Ms. Brooks," he said when he reached her, his voice carrying that same deep timbre that had haunted her dreams. "Good morning." The fact that he knew her name sent a shockwave through her system. When had he learned her name? How long had he been paying attention to her without her knowing? "Mr. Hale," she managed, proud that her voice came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Good morning." He stood close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her want to lean closer. The lobby continued to bustle around them, but it felt like they existed in their own private bubble. "I trust you slept well." The question seemed innocent enough, but the way his eyes glittered suggested he knew exactly how restless her night had been. "Like a baby," she lied smoothly, tilting her chin up with that natural confidence that had gotten her into this mess in the first place. "Two could play this game. And you?" A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real expression she'd ever seen him make. It transformed his entire face, adding warmth to those sharp features and making him look less like an untouchable CEO and more like a man who very much enjoyed a challenge. "Surprisingly well," he murmured, and something in his tone made her stomach flip. "I had some very interesting thoughts to keep me company." Was he flirting with her? Rainey felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole, except this wonderland was filled with expensive suits and sexual tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Interesting thoughts can be dangerous," she heard herself say, her voice dropping to match his intimate tone. "The best ones usually are." His gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes, and Rainey felt heat bloom across her cheeks. The elevator dinged behind them, breaking the spell. A group of executives emerged, and suddenly the spell was broken as the real world rushed back in. "Have a productive day, Miss Brooks," Ashton said, but he didn't move away immediately. Instead, he leaned just a fraction closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "And Rainey?" Her name on his lips made her knees weak. "Yes? Your theory from yesterday. I think you should test it sometime." Before she could respond, he was walking away, leaving her standing in the middle of the lobby, with her heart hammering and her mind reeling. Test it. What exactly did that mean? Around her, the morning routine continued, as if the earth hadn't just shifted on its axis. But as Rainey finally made it to the elevator on shaking legs, she couldn't escape one devastating realization. Ashton Hale wasn't ignoring her anymore. He was hunting her, and God help her, she wanted to be caught. When a predator decides to play, the game becomes irresistible. By Thursday afternoon, Rainey was convinced she was losing her mind. It started with the coffee. Tuesday morning, she'd found her usual vanilla latte waiting at her desk with a note from the building's cafe. Compliments of management. Wednesday, it was a perfectly timed elevator ride where Ashton appeared just as the doors opened, his presence filling the small space until the air felt electric. And this morning, he'd somehow materialized in the creative department, having a completely legitimate conversation with her supervisor about quarterly projections. Right. Next. To her desk. For 20 minutes. Now, as she sat in the fourth-floor conference room reviewing campaign mock-ups, she could feel herself constantly checking over her shoulder. Was he going to appear around every corner? Had he always been this involved in day-to-day operations? Or was she suddenly hyper-aware of his existence? The answer came with a soft knock on the conference room door. "Miss Brooks? Do you have a moment?" Rainey's pulse jumped straight to her throat. She turned to find Ashton standing in the doorway, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal grey suit that made his eyes look like storm clouds. His expression was perfectly professional, but there was something predatory in the way he watched her, like a wolf who'd found exactly what he'd been hunting for. "Of course, Mr. Hale." She closed her laptop and stood, smoothing down her emerald green dress with hands that refused to stop trembling. "What can I do for you?" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. The conference room, which had felt spacious moments before, now seemed intimate and charged with an energy that made her skin tingle. "I've been reviewing the creative team's recent work," he said, moving closer with that fluid grace that made her think of dangerous things. "Your campaign for the wellness app was impressive." Rainey blinked, caught off guard. "You reviewed my campaign?" "I review everything that crosses my desk." He was standing close enough now that she could see the tiny flecks of blue in his grey eyes, could catch that intoxicating scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely him. "But yours stood out." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately wanted to take it back. Too eager, too obvious. But Ashton smiled, that slow, devastating smile that had been haunting her dreams. Because it was bold, fearless. It took risks that most people wouldn't dare. The way he said it, the way his gaze held hers as he spoke, made it clear they weren't just talking about advertising anymore. "I believe in taking calculated risks," Rainey managed, lifting her chin with that natural confidence that seemed to intrigue him so much. "Life's too short to play it safe all the time." "Is it now?" He took another step closer, and suddenly she was backed against the conference table, his tall frame creating a wall of masculine heat that made her breath catch. "And what kinds of risks do you like to take, Rainey?" Her name on his lips, spoken in that low, intimate tone, sent shivers down her spine. The professional mask was slipping, revealing something raw and hungry underneath that made her heart race. "That depends," she whispered, surprised by her own boldness. "What's being offered?" For a moment, the air between them crackled with possibility. Ashton's gaze dropped to her lips, and Rainey felt herself leaning forward, drawn by a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Then his phone buzzed. The spell broke, and Ashton stepped back, the professional mask sliding seamlessly back into place. But his eyes still burned with that same intensity that made her feel like she might combust. "I should take this," he said, glancing at his phone. "But Rainey..." "Yes? I'd like to discuss your campaign ideas further. Are you free for dinner Friday night? Purely business, of course." The way he said, "purely business," suggested it would be anything but. She struggled to find her voice, her professional instincts warring with something much more primal. "Yes, I'm free." "Perfect." He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with that predatory smile. "And Rainey, about that theory of yours." Her heart stopped. "What about it? I think you're about to discover just how wrong you were." He left her standing there, gripping the edge of the conference table for support, her entire body humming with an energy she didn't know how to process. Dinner with Ashton Hale, her boss, the man who'd been systematically dismantling her sanity for the past 3 days with nothing more than strategically timed appearances and looks that could melt steel. Rainey sank into the nearest chair, pressing her hands to her flushed cheeks. What was she doing? This was dangerous territory, the kind that could destroy her career and her peace of mind. But as she replayed the hunger in his eyes, the way his voice had dropped when he said her name, she realized something that should have terrified her. She didn't care about the danger anymore. She wanted to see just how far this game could go. Some dinners are about food. Others are about hunger of an entirely different kind. Friday evening descended over Seattle like a velvet curtain, and Rainey stood in front of her bedroom mirror, wondering if it was possible to die from anticipation alone. She'd changed outfits 4 times. The red dress was too obvious, the black one too severe. The blue seemed too casual for whatever this night was going to become. Finally, she'd settled on a deep burgundy wrap dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, paired with heels that gave her enough height to look Ashton in the eye when she inevitably had to face whatever game he was playing. "Girl, you look like you're about to either seduce someone or murder them," Jasmine said from her perch on Rainey's bed, where she'd been providing commentary for the past hour. "And honestly, both options seem appropriate for dealing with your mysterious CEO." Jasmine Brooks Williams, no relation despite the shared last name that had bonded them during freshman orientation at University of Washington 5 years ago, was the kind of friend who could read Rainey like an open book. As Nexus Tech's head of digital marketing, she was sharp, intuitive, and had never steered Rainey wrong in matters of the heart. Well, except for that disaster with Trevor from accounting, but they didn't talk about Trevor. "You know what you remind me of right now?" Jasmine continued, adjusting her position on the bed with the familiarity of someone who'd been Rainey's chosen sister for years. "That time in college when you had that massive crush on Professor Chen's TA, but you were too scared to do anything about it. Same nervous energy, same I'm pretending this isn't a big deal vibes." "This is completely different," Rainey protested, smoothing her hands over the silky fabric. Her reflection showed a woman who looked confident and composed, the complete opposite of how she felt inside. "That was a crush. This is my career we're talking about." "Uh-huh." Jasmine's tone dripped skepticism. "And I'm the Queen of England. Honey, that man has been circling you like a shark for 3 days. This isn't about quarterly reports, and we both know it." Deep down, Rainey knew her friend was right. The way Ashton looked at her, the carefully orchestrated encounters, the invitation delivered with enough heat to melt steel, none of it had anything to do with business. "Jazz," Rainey said quietly, meeting her friend's eyes in the mirror. "What if I'm reading this all wrong? What if he really just wants to discuss work and I'm making this into something it's not?" Jasmine was quiet for a moment, her expression softening with the kind of understanding that came from years of friendship. "Rain, honey, I've watched you demolish presentations that left board members speechless. I've seen you negotiate contracts that made seasoned executives weep. You don't doubt yourself professionally." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "So if you're this nervous, it's because this isn't professional. Trust your instincts." Her phone buzzed. "Car will be there in 10 minutes. Looking forward to tonight." The casual sign-off, just the initial, felt intimate in a way that made her stomach flutter. How had he gotten her number? When had he arranged a car? The man was thorough. She'd give him that. "Okay, time for real talk," Jasmine said, standing up and gripping Rainey's shoulders with the familiarity of someone who'd helped her through heartbreak, career doubts, and that unfortunate incident with the hair bleach sophomore year. "What are you doing, really doing? Because this guy isn't some random dude you met at a coffee shop. He's your boss. He's rich enough to buy small countries, and he's clearly used to getting what he wants." Rainey met her own eyes in the mirror, seeing the truth she'd been avoiding all week. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "But Jazz, when he looks at me, I feel like the most interesting person in the world, like he sees something in me that I didn't even know was there." You know what scares me? Jasmine asked, her voice gentle but serious. It's not that he's your boss or that he's rich or even that this could complicate your career. It's that I've never seen you look at someone the way you looked at him when he walked away from that coffee machine. How did I look at him? Like you were already halfway in love and terrified about it. The words hit Rainey like a physical blow, mainly because they might be true. That's ridiculous. I barely know him. Sometimes the heart doesn't need a full biography, Rain. Sometimes it just knows. Jasmine's voice carried the weight of experience. Her own relationship with her fiancé, Marcus, had started with a similar instant recognition that had scared them both. The question is, are you brave enough to find out what this could be? The restaurant Ashton had chosen was understated elegance personified. Soft lighting, intimate booths, and the kind of quiet luxury that whispered rather than shouted wealth. Rainey arrived precisely on time, her nerves humming with an energy that felt electric. She spotted him immediately. Ashton sat at a corner table, and the sight of him in a dark suit without a tie, his shirt open at the collar, nearly stole her breath. He looked relaxed in a way she'd never seen at the office, still devastatingly handsome, but more approachable, more human. When he saw her approaching, he stood, and the smile that spread across his face was worth every moment of nervous energy she'd expended. Rainey. He moved to pull out her chair, his hand briefly touching her lower back as she sat. The contact lasted only seconds, but it left her skin tingling. You look incredible. Thank you. She settled into her seat, hyper-aware of how close he was, how the subtle scent of his cologne seemed to wrap around her like a promise. This place is beautiful. I thought you might appreciate somewhere we could actually talk. He poured wine from a bottle that had apparently been waiting, a rich red that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Away from curious eyes and office politics. The implication hung in the air between them. This wasn't just dinner. This was them, stripped of professional pretenses, sitting across from each other with nothing but honesty and whatever this electric thing between them was. So, Rainey said, taking a sip of wine that tasted like liquid silk, are you going to tell me what this is really about? Because I have a feeling we're not here to discuss campaign strategies. Ashton leaned back in his chair, studying her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. Direct. I like that about you. Among other things, the boldness surprised even her, but something about this man brought out a side of herself she didn't know existed. Among many other things, his voice dropped to that low, intimate tone that made her pulse quicken. Your laugh, for instance. The way you light up a room without even trying. The way you challenge people to think differently. You've been paying attention. More than you know. He leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. Can I ask you something? Shoot. That day at the coffee machine, were you really talking about me? Or were you hoping I'd overhear? The question caught her completely off guard, and for a moment she could only stare at him. The idea that she might have subconsciously wanted him to hear her joke, that some part of her had been trying to get his attention. She started to deny it, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't mocking her or trying to embarrass her. He genuinely wanted to know. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe part of me was. I thought so. His smile was triumphant and tender at the same time. Do you know what I thought when I heard you laughing about me not liking women? Rainey shook her head, not trusting her voice. I thought, she has no idea what she's talking about, and I'm going to spend every day proving her wrong. The air between them crackled with tension, so thick she could barely breathe. This was it, the moment where they stopped pretending this was anything other than what it was. And how's that working out for you? She whispered. Ashton reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers with deliberate slowness. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. Ask me again at the end of the night. They ordered dinner, but neither of them could focus on food when there was so much to discover about each other. Conversation flowed like the wine, intoxicating and smooth, revealing layers of personality that had been hidden beneath professional facades. Tell me about growing up, Rainey said as their appetizers arrived untouched. What was it like being the heir apparent? Something flickered across Ashton's expression, vulnerability mixed with old pain. Lonely, he admitted, surprising them both with his honesty. My parents divorced when I was 12. Dad threw himself into building the company. Mum moved to Europe to find herself. I spent most of my teenage years in boarding schools. summers at business camps, learning how to be worthy of an inheritance I never asked for. Is that why you seem so—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Emotionally unavailable?" His smile was rueful. "That's what my ex-fiancée used to say." Ex-fiancée? Rainey felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy. 3 years ago. Amanda. Ashton's voice was matter-of-fact, but she could see the careful neutrality in his expression. Perfect on paper. Right family, right education, right connections. We looked good together in photos for the society pages. What happened? I realized I was marrying a beautiful stranger, someone who loved the idea of being Mrs. Ashton Hale more than she loved me. He met her eyes directly. What about you? Ever been close to marriage? Once? College boyfriend. Rainey found herself opening up in a way that surprised her. Jonathan, we dated for 3 years and everyone expected us to get engaged after graduation, but when it came time to actually plan a future together, I realized I was more excited about my career than I was about him. Smart woman. Or selfish woman, depending on who you ask. His mother certainly had opinions. And now? Now I'm having dinner with my incredibly attractive boss, wondering if I've completely lost my mind. The wine was making her bolder than usual, or maybe it was the way he looked at her like she was something precious. For what it's worth, Ashton said, his thumb tracing patterns on her hand, I think your mind is one of the most beautiful things about you. And just like that, Rainey realized she was in completely over her head, and she didn't want to be rescued. The most dangerous conversations happen when you forget to guard your heart. 2 hours later, the restaurant had emptied around them, but Rainey barely noticed. The world had narrowed to this table, this man, and the way his voice wrapped around her like silk when he spoke. They'd moved past the pretense of business entirely. Somewhere between the second glass of wine and Ashton's story about growing up with impossible expectations, the conversation had shifted into territory that felt both thrilling and terrifying. So let me get this straight, Rainey said, leaning forward with her chin propped on her hand, wine making her bold and honest. You inherited a multi-billion-dollar company at 35, and your biggest fear is that people only see the money. Isn't it obvious? Ashton swirled the wine in his glass. His usual composure cracked just enough to let her see the man underneath. When you're worth what I'm worth, everyone wants something. No one looks at you and thinks, interesting person. They think opportunity. That's incredibly sad. The words slipped out before she could filter them, raw and honest. Is it? His grey eyes found hers across the table. Or is it just realistic? Rainey studied his face. The sharp jawline that looked carved from marble. The eyes that held intelligence and wariness in equal measure. The mouth that curved into smiles she was beginning to recognize as rare and precious. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? She asked quietly. Something flickered in his expression. Vulnerability, maybe. Hope. What? I see a man who pays attention to details other people miss, who remembers that I like vanilla lattes and somehow arranges for them to appear on my desk, who listens when people talk, really listens instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. She paused, the wine making her braver than she had any right to be. I see someone who's probably incredibly lonely. The silence that followed felt charged with electricity. Ashton's hand, resting on the table between them, flexed slightly, and Rainey watched a dozen emotions flash across his face before he settled on something that looked like wonder. You're dangerous, Rainey Brooks, he said finally, his voice rough with something she couldn't name. How so? Because you make me want to tell you things I've never told anyone. Her breath caught. Like what? Ashton was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the white tablecloth. When he spoke, his voice was so low she had to lean closer to hear him. Like the fact that I've been watching you for months, not just since that day at the coffee machine. Like how you brighten up every room you walk into, and I found myself scheduling meetings on your floor just to hear you laugh. His eyes met hers, intense and unguarded. Like how I haven't felt this interested in another person in, God, maybe ever. Rainey's heart hammered against her ribs. Ashton, I know it's complicated, he continued, his hand moving across the table until his fingers brushed hers. I know I'm your boss, and this goes against every rule in the employee handbook. But Rainey, I can't stop thinking about you. About this. He gestured between them, encompassing the electric energy that seemed to crackle in the space where they sat. She should say something sensible, point out all the reasons this was impossible, dangerous, career-ending. Instead, she found herself turning her hand palm up, letting his fingers intertwine with hers. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "I don't know," he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. "But I know I don't want to stop." The waiter appeared at their table, discreetly clearing his throat. "Excuse me, but we're closing soon." Ashton never took his eyes off Rainey as he reached for his wallet. "Of course, check, please." The ride back to her apartment was charged with unspoken possibilities. Ashton's driver navigated Seattle's evening traffic while they sat in the back of the luxury sedan, the city lights painting patterns across their faces through tinted windows. "This is me," Rainey said as the car pulled up to her building, a converted warehouse in Capitol Hill with industrial charm and reasonable rent. Ashton looked at the building, then at her. "Rainey, I know." She could feel the weight of the decision hanging between them. Invite him up and everything would change. Say goodnight here, and maybe they could pretend this was still just dinner between colleagues. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she realized she was tired of pretending. "Would you like to come up for coffee?" The words came out steadier than she felt. Real coffee this time. No hidden agendas or strategic encounters. Ashton's smile was soft and devastating. "I thought you'd never ask." As they stood outside her building, Rainey fumbling with her keys while hyper-aware of Ashton's presence behind her, she realized something that should have terrified her. She was falling for him. Hard. And there was no safety net. Some nights rewrite your entire story in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Rainey's apartment welcomed them with warm lighting and the lingering scent of vanilla candles. It was a space that reflected her personality perfectly. Exposed brick walls adorned with colorful abstract art, plush furniture in rich jewel tones, and plants cascading from every available surface. Books were stacked on coffee tables, throw pillows were scattered invitingly on the oversized couch, and everything about the space whispered comfort and authenticity. Ashton stepped inside, his tall frame seeming to fill the cozy living room, and Rainey watched him take it all in with those observant grey eyes that missed nothing. "This is very you," he said softly, running his fingers along the spine of a book on her coffee table, a collection of Maya Angelou poetry that was worn from repeated reading. He picked up another volume, smiling at the title, The Color of Water, James McBride. "Is that good or bad?" Rainey asked, suddenly nervous about having him in her personal space, seeing the parts of herself she didn't share with the world. "It's perfect." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "It's honest, warm, beautiful." He paused, his voice dropping to that low, intimate tone that made her skin tingle. "Like you." She watched as he moved through her space with careful reverence, pausing at the gallery wall of family photos. "Is this your family?" Rainey joined him, her shoulder brushing his as she pointed to different pictures. "That's my mom, Diana. She's a nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital. Has been for 22 years. Her voice carried obvious pride. "And that's my dad, Robert. He teaches high school history and coaches basketball. They've been married 28 years. They look happy," Ashton observed, studying a photo of her parents dancing at what appeared to be a wedding. "They are. Disgustingly so, according to my younger brother." She laughed, pointing to another photo. "That's Jordan. He's at Stanford studying computer science. Brilliant kid, terrible at returning phone calls." "Sounds like a normal family." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "What about your parents? You mentioned they divorced." Ashton's expression grew distant. "My mother lives in Monaco now with husband number 3. Or is it 4? I lose track. My father, well, you know where he is." "The cemetery," Rainey said softly, remembering his brief mention of his father's death during dinner. 2 years ago, heart attack at his desk. Ashton's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the pain he was trying to hide. "The last conversation we had was about quarterly projections. How's that for a final memory?" Without thinking, Rainey reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We weren't particularly close. Hard to have a relationship with someone who viewed you as a business asset rather than a son." "Is that why you're so—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Careful about letting people in?" He turned their joined hands over, studying her fingers like they held secrets he wanted to learn. Probably, though I'm beginning to think some people are worth the risk. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning and possibility. Rainey felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" she managed, proud that her voice came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I have that fancy stuff you rich people probably drink." Ashton laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed his entire face. "Rich people coffee? You know, the kind that costs more per pound than my monthly Netflix subscription." She was rambling now, nervous energy making her chattier than usual as she busied herself with the coffee maker. "I splurged after my last promotion. Figured if I was going to have caffeine addiction, it might as well be classy caffeine addiction." "What made you choose creative work?" he asked, leaning against the counter as she measured coffee grounds. "Most people I know went into tech for the money or the prestige. Honestly, I wanted to tell stories that mattered." She paused, considering her words. "My mom used to work double shifts when I was little, and my dad would make up these elaborate bedtime stories to help me fall asleep. Not fairy tales, real stories about regular people doing extraordinary things. I guess I wanted to do that professionally. And do you? Tell stories that matter?" "I try. That wellness app campaign you mentioned? It was for mental health resources in underserved communities. Not exactly glamorous, but..." She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "But it probably changed lives," Ashton finished. "That's not unglamorous, Rainey. That's beautiful." She was aware of him moving closer, his presence a warm weight at her back, as she fumbled with coffee filters. When his hands settled gently on her shoulders, she froze. "Rainey." The way he said her name, soft, almost reverent, made her turn around. He was standing so close she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You're nervous," he observed, his hands still resting on her shoulders, thumbs tracing gentle circles that sent shivers down her spine. "Terrified," she corrected honestly. This is not something I do. Invite my boss home for coffee after the most intense dinner of my life." "Good." His smile was tender and devastating. "Because this isn't something I do either. In fact, I can't remember the last time I've been in someone's home. A real home, not some designer showplace." "What does your place look like?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Like a hotel suite that someone pays a lot of money to maintain." He shook his head, looking almost embarrassed. "All clean lines and expensive furniture that no one ever actually sits on. Nothing like this." His gaze swept over her living room again. "Nothing with personality or warmth or soul?" Rainey suggested. "Exactly." His hands moved from her shoulders to frame her face, his touch so gentle it made her heart ache. "You have so much soul, Rainey. It radiates out of you like heat from a fire." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. When she opened them, he was studying her face like he was memorizing every detail. "What are we doing, Ashton?" she whispered. "Really doing?" "I don't know," he admitted, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "All I know is that I've spent 3 years building walls around myself, convincing myself that keeping people at a distance was protection, and then you laughed about me not liking women, and suddenly..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Suddenly, I remembered what it felt like to want something more than quarterly profits and board meetings." The coffee maker gurgled behind them, ignored. The city hummed beyond her windows, forgotten. The world had narrowed to this moment, this man, this feeling building between them like a storm gathering strength. "I want to kiss you," Ashton said quietly, his forehead resting against hers. "I've wanted to kiss you since that first day at the coffee machine, but I need you to know that if I do, there's no going back. Not for me." Rainey felt her breath catch, her heart racing so fast she was sure he could hear it. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not good at casual, Rainey. I'm not good at pretending something doesn't matter when it does, and this..." He gestured between them, his eyes never leaving hers. "This matters. You matter." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability she could see in his eyes, broke something open inside her chest. Here was this powerful, successful man who could have anything he wanted, and he was standing in her kitchen asking permission, telling her she mattered. "Then kiss me," she whispered. The words had barely left her lips before his mouth was on hers, and suddenly the world exploded into sensation. His kiss was everything she'd imagined, and nothing she was prepared for. Tender and fierce, controlled and desperate all at once. His hands tangled in her hair, and she could taste wine on his lips, could feel the restraint in the way he held her, like she was something precious and fragile. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rainey felt like she'd been fundamentally altered at a cellular level. Ashton rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face. "Jesus, Rainey," he breathed. "What are you doing to me?" She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at the way he leaned into her touch. "The same thing you're doing to me." They moved to the couch without discussing it, settling into the plush cushions with her tucked against his side. It felt natural, inevitable, like they'd been gravitating toward this moment since the first time their eyes met across that office lobby. "Tell me something," Ashton said, his fingers playing with the ends of her hair. "Something you've never told anyone else." Rainey tilted her head to look at him. "Why?" "Because I want to know you, really know you, not just the brilliant woman who makes presentations that leave board members speechless, but you, the person who reads Maya Angelou poetry and splurges on expensive coffee and makes vanilla candles feel like home." The request was so simple and so intimate that it took her breath away. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I keep a journal," she said finally. "Have since I was 12, not just recording events, but writing letters to my future self, asking her questions, telling her about my dreams, wondering if she's proud of the choices I'm making." "What does she say back?" Rainey smiled, touched that he understood immediately. "That she's proud, that she's grateful I was brave enough to take risks, to trust my instincts, to—" She looked up at him meaningfully. "To let people surprise me. Am I surprising you? Every minute." She shifted in his arms, her hand resting over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. "I thought you were this cold, untouchable CEO. Turns out you're this incredibly thoughtful man who notices details and makes me feel like the most interesting person in the room." "You are the most interesting person in the room," he said seriously. "In any room." "Your turn," she said, settling more comfortably against him. "Tell me something no one else knows." Ashton was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to write poetry," he admitted, and she could feel him tense as if expecting mockery. "In college, before I got serious about business. Terrible poetry, probably, but it was mine. Something that had nothing to do with market shares or profit margins." "Do you still write?" "Haven't in years, until—" He paused, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Until I met you. Suddenly I found myself thinking in metaphors again, wondering how to capture the way you laugh or the way you look when you're concentrating on something." Rainey felt her heart squeeze tight. "That's not terrible, Ashton. That's beautiful." "Is it? Because most days I feel like I'm just going through the motions. Board meetings, budget reviews, strategic planning. All necessary, but none of it alive. None of it real." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "And then you walked into my world with your coffee machine theories and your infectious laugh, and suddenly everything feels possible again." They talked until the coffee grew cold, sharing stories and secrets, learning the landscape of each other's hearts. She told him about her first heartbreak, Jamie in 9th grade who broke up with her via text, her biggest fear, never living up to her own potential, and her secret dream, writing a novel someday maybe. He shared his recurring nightmare, being trapped in board meetings that never end, his guilt over his father's death, wishing their last conversation had been about anything other than work, and his confession that he'd been following her work for months before the coffee incident. "I had my assistant pull every campaign you'd worked on," he admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "I told myself it was due diligence, making sure I understood our creative team's capabilities. But really, I was just fascinated by the way your mind worked." "That's either flattering or slightly stalkerish," Rainey teased. "Definitely both," he agreed with a rueful smile. "I was trying to understand how someone could consistently create work that was both commercially successful and emotionally resonant. Most people can do one or the other, but you—" He shook his head in admiration. "You make it look effortless." "It's not effortless," she said quietly. "I just refuse to believe that reaching people and making money have to be mutually exclusive. See? That's what I mean. You think differently than anyone else I know." As the evening wound down, and they both realized it was well past midnight, Neither wanted the night to end. But when Ashton finally left, after a kiss that lasted long enough to leave them both breathless and wanting more, Rainey stood at her window watching his car disappear into Seattle's glittering darkness. Everything had changed, and she couldn't wait to see what came next. When your personal and professional worlds collide, the only question is whether you'll burn down everything you've built or discover something worth rebuilding for. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's persistent drizzle and Rainey's complete inability to concentrate on anything that didn't involve replaying Friday night's kiss in vivid detail. She'd barely slept all weekend, her mind cycling through every moment of their evening together, the way Ashton's hands had felt cradling her face, the reverent tone in his voice when he said she mattered, the heat in his grey eyes when he'd finally pulled away from their kiss. Her apartment still smelled faintly of his cologne, a constant reminder that everything had fundamentally shifted. Now standing in the Nexus Tech elevator, heading toward what promised to be the most complicated Monday of her career, Rainey tried to school her features into professional composure. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue blouse that brought out her eyes paired with a charcoal pencil skirt that was business appropriate but flattering. Professional, with just a hint of the woman who'd spent Friday night wrapped in the arms of her incredibly attractive boss. The elevator dinged at the 38th floor, and Rainey stepped out into the familiar bustle of the creative department. Everything looked exactly the same open workspace, the same motivational posters, the same co-workers clutching their Monday morning coffee like lifelines. But she felt like she was walking through a movie set, playing the role of herself, while her real self was still tangled up in memories of Ashton's touch. Well, Jasmine appeared at her elbow, eyes sparkling with curiosity. Look who's glowing this fine Monday morning. That dinner must have been very educational. Rainey nearly choked on her own coffee. Can you not announce my personal business to the entire office? So there is personal business to announce. Jasmine practically purred, following Rainey to her desk. Girl, you look like you've been thoroughly kissed. And I mean thoroughly. Before Rainey could deny anything, her computer chimed with a new email notification. Her heart jumped when she saw the sender, ahalenexustech.com. Subject, Project Review. Urgent Ms. Brooks. Please see me in my office at 10 a.m. to discuss the wellness app campaign revisions. Come prepared to present your ideas. Best regards, Ashton Hale, Chief Executive Officer. The formal tone was so at odds with the man who'd whispered her name like a prayer while holding her face in his hands that Rainey had to read it twice. Was this how it was going to be? Professional distance during the day, stolen moments after hours. Earth to Rainey. Jasmine waved a hand in front of her face. You're doing that thing where you stare into space and look like you're solving world hunger. What's going on? Nothing, Rainey lied, minimizing the email. Just work stuff. But as 10 a.m. approached, her nerves frayed like an old rope. How was she supposed to sit across from Ashton and discuss campaign strategies when all she could think about was the way he'd tasted, the way his hands had felt in her hair, the way he'd looked at her like she was something miraculous? Ashton's corner office occupied the entire northeast section of the 45th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay. The space was exactly what she'd expected. Sleek, modern and imposing, with a glass desk that probably cost more than her car and furniture that belonged in an architectural magazine. But when the door closed behind her with a soft click, all she could focus on was the man rising from behind that intimidating desk. Ashton looked every inch the powerful CEO in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit and crisp white shirt, but when their eyes met across the expanse of his office, something electric passed between them that had nothing to do with quarterly reports. Rainey. Her name on his lips carried the same warm intimacy it had held Friday night, despite the formal setting. Mr. Hale, she replied carefully, hyper-aware that glass walls meant anyone walking by could see them. Something flickered in his expression. Disappointment, maybe, or amusement at her attempt to maintain professional distance. He gestured toward the conference area of his office, where a round table surrounded by leather chairs created a more intimate meeting space. Please sit. Would you like coffee? Water? I'm fine, thank you. Rainey settled into one of the chairs, placing her portfolio carefully on the table while trying to ignore the way Ashton moved, all fluid grace and controlled power. When he sat across from her, close enough that she could smell that intoxicating cologne. Her concentration nearly evaporated completely. "How was your weekend?" he asked quietly, his professional mask slipping just enough to let her see the man underneath. "Complicated," she admitted honestly. "Yours?" "Long. I kept thinking about Friday night." His voice dropped to that intimate tone that made her skin tingle. "About you. About how beautiful you looked in the candlelight, how you felt in my arms." "Ashton." The warning in her voice was half-hearted at best. "We're at work." "Are we?" He leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes intense and focused entirely on her. "Because right now all I can think about is how much I want to kiss you again." Rainey's breath caught, heat pooling low in her stomach, despite every rational thought screaming at her to maintain professional boundaries. "Someone could see us. The glass is one way from this angle," he said, never taking his eyes off her face. "And my assistant knows not to disturb me during important meetings. Is that what this is? An important meeting? The most important one I'll have all day." He reached across the table, his fingers barely brushing hers in a touch that sent electricity shooting up her arm. "I needed to see you, to make sure Friday night wasn't some incredibly vivid dream." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability she could see in his eyes despite his powerful position and intimidating office, made her chest tighten with emotion. This wasn't just physical attraction or forbidden office romance. This was something deeper, more complicated, more dangerous than either of them had bargained for. "We should actually talk about the campaign," she said weakly, even as she turned her hand palm up to let their fingers intertwine properly. "Should we?" His thumb traced circles on her palm, the same gesture that had driven her crazy at dinner. "Or should we talk about the fact that I've rescheduled 3 meetings this morning because all I could think about was getting you alone?" "Ashton," she wanted to say something about professionalism, about the risks they were taking, about all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, what came out was, "I couldn't sleep all weekend." His smile was triumphant and tender at the same time. "Good. I'd hate to be the only one suffering." A knock on the office door made them spring apart like teenagers caught making out. Ashton's assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Hale? The board meeting has been moved up to 11:30. "Thank you, Sarah," Ashton replied smoothly, though his eyes never left Rainey's face. "Please reschedule my lunch meeting as well." They sat in charged silence until the assistant's footsteps faded away. The spell was broken, reality creeping back in like cold air through an open window. "We can't keep doing this," Rainey said quietly, though she made no move to pull her hand away from his. "Doing what?" "Playing with fire in your office. Someone's going to notice eventually. There will be rumors, speculation." She trailed off, seeing the way his jaw tightened at her words. "Are you saying you want to stop?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand stilled against hers. "No," she admitted, the word coming out more breathless than she intended. "I'm saying we need to be smarter about this. More careful." Relief flooded his expression. "Then we'll be careful, discreet." He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that made her entire body sing. "But Rainey, I'm not walking away from this. From you, I can't." The raw honesty in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and irreplaceable, made her feel like she could conquer the world or spontaneously combust from the intensity of her feelings. "What are we doing?" she whispered, the question that had become their refrain. "We're falling," he said simply. "The question is whether we're brave enough to trust each other to catch us." And as Rainey looked into his storm-gray eyes, she realized she'd already made her choice. She was falling, and she didn't want to be caught by anyone else. Every secret has an expiration date. The only question is whether it explodes or gets gently revealed. 3 weeks of stolen glances across conference rooms, carefully orchestrated elevator encounters, and late-night text messages that made Rainey's heart race had created a delicious tension that hummed beneath the surface of every workday. But by Thursday afternoon, the careful balance they'd maintained was beginning to crack under the weight of everything they weren't saying. Rainey stood at her desk, staring at the email that had just landed in her inbox like a bomb with a pretty bow on top. Subject: team-building retreat. Mandatory attendance. All department heads and senior staff are required to attend this weekend's executive retreat at Cascade Lodge. Please confirm your attendance immediately. Business casual attire recommended for outdoor activities. Patricia Williams, HR Director. Her phone buzzed immediately. A text from Ashton. Did you get the retreat email? Rainey typed back quickly. Yes, this is going to be complicated. Complicated is an understatement. We need to talk. Before she could respond, Jasmine appeared at her shoulder like she had a sixth sense for drama. As head of digital marketing, Jazz had perfected the art of reading people. It was essential for understanding consumer behavior and predicting market trends. Unfortunately for Rainey, those same skills made her impossible to lie to. Ooh, fancy mountain retreat, Jasmine said, reading over her screen. I bet the food will be amazing. And maybe you'll finally get some action with that mysterious guy you've been texting all the time. Rainey's blood froze. What mysterious guy? Girl, please. Jasmine rolled her eyes, settling onto the edge of Rainey's desk with the familiarity of someone who'd been doing it for years. You think I haven't noticed? The constant smiling at your phone, the way you've been glowing like you're radioactive with happiness, the fact that you've started wearing lip gloss to work every day? She lowered her voice conspiratorially. And don't think I missed that new perfume. That's not drugstore stuff, honey. I want to smell irresistible to someone specific perfume. There's no he, Rainey lied, but even she could hear how unconvincing she sounded. Jasmine's expression shifted from playful to concerned, as someone who'd watched her best friend navigate heartbreak, career challenges, and that unfortunate phase where Rainey thought she could pull off bangs. Jazz had developed a finely tuned ability to read between the lines. Rainey. Her voice was gentle but serious. I've known you for 5 years. I know the difference between your I'm crushing on someone glow and your I'm falling hard for someone who might break my heart glow. And honey, you've been wearing the second one for weeks. Jazz. And I suppose that hickey you tried to cover with concealer last week was from a very aggressive mosquito. Jasmine's voice carried the tone of someone who'd caught her friend in a well-meaning but obvious lie. Rainey's hand flew to her neck instinctively, even though the mark had faded days ago. You saw that? I see everything, babe. It's my job to notice details other people miss. Jasmine's expression softened with the kind of understanding that came from years of friendship. Look, I'm not trying to pry into your business, but I am trying to look out for you. And whoever this guy is, he's got you acting different. Different how? Happier, for one thing. But also, Jasmine paused, choosing her words carefully. More careful. Like you're protecting something precious. The Rainey I know doesn't sneak around. She doesn't hide relationships or dodge questions about her personal life. So either this guy is married, which would be a hard no from me, or there's some other complication that's making you feel like you can't be honest with your best friend. The insight hit too close to home, and Rainey felt tears prick at her eyes. The irony of having the best relationship of her life with the one person she absolutely couldn't tell her best friend about was starting to eat at her. Jazz, she said quietly, if I told you I was involved with someone who could potentially complicate my career, what would you say? I'd say that depends on whether he's worth the risk. Jasmine's voice was serious now, all traces of teasing gone. And I'd ask if he's treating you right, if he's making you feel valued and respected, and if he's willing to fight for you when things get complicated. She paused. Because things always get complicated, Rain. The question is whether you have a partner or just someone who disappears when the going gets tough. What if I told you he makes me feel like the most interesting person in the world, like he sees parts of me I didn't even know existed? Then I'd say you're in love, Jasmine said softly. Real love, the kind that changes you. And I'd tell you that life's too short to let other people's opinions keep you from happiness. She studied her friend's face. But I'd also remind you that you're worth fighting for, and anyone who's not willing to do that doesn't deserve you. Rainey felt a tear escape despite her best efforts. When did you get so wise about relationships? When I almost let Marcus slip away because I was scared of how other people would react to us being together. Jasmine's voice carried the weight of experience. My family had opinions about me dating someone who didn't have a college degree. His family thought I was some bougie princess who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world. We almost broke up 3 times before we realized we were letting other people write our love story. And now? Now we're engaged, planning a life together, and both our families have come around because they can see how happy we make each other. Jasmine reached over and squeezed Rainey's hand. Love worth having Is love worth fighting for, babe? Just make sure he's willing to do the fighting with you, not expecting you to do it alone. Relax, your secret's safe with me, Jasmine continued, her voice gentle but knowing. But honey, whoever he is, he's got you glowing like a woman in love. And you know what? I'm happy for you. You deserve someone who makes you smile like that. If only she knew, Rainey thought as her heart clenched with a mixture of guilt and longing. The weight of keeping such a massive secret from someone who'd been her anchor through every major life event was becoming almost unbearable. The retreat location was breathtaking. Cascade Lodge, nestled in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, surrounded by towering evergreens and overlooking a pristine lake that reflected the sky like a mirror. Under different circumstances, Rainey would have been thrilled to spend a weekend in such a beautiful setting. Instead, she felt like she was walking into a minefield. The evening welcome reception buzzed with conversation and the clink of wine glasses on the lodge's wraparound deck. Rainey nursed a glass of Pinot Noir and tried to look engaged in a conversation about quarterly projections, while hyper-aware of Ashton's presence across the deck. He looked devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a navy button-down that made his grey eyes look like storm clouds. Every so often their gazes would meet across the crowd, and the heat in his eyes made her skin tingle, despite the mountain air's cool bite. The careful distance they maintained felt like physical pain, watching him laugh at someone else's jokes, seeing other women compete for his attention, having to pretend he was just another executive instead of the man who'd made love to her with words and gentle touches just days before. "Earth to Rainey," came a voice beside her. Brad from accounting was looking at her with concern, his kind face creased with worry. "You okay? You seem distracted." "Just tired from the drive," she said quickly, forcing herself to focus on the conversation. Brad was harmless, a sweet guy in his early 30s who'd been asking her to coffee for months with the persistence of someone who didn't quite understand that friendship was all she was offering. "Well, if you need anything this weekend, just let me know," Brad said, his hand briefly touching her arm. "I'm just down the hall from you." Across the deck, Rainey saw Ashton's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly as he watched the interaction. The possessive flash in his eyes sent a thrill through her, even as her rational mind reminded her that he had no right to be jealous in public. 20 minutes later, when she excused herself to use the restroom, she wasn't entirely surprised to find Ashton waiting in the lodge's dimly lit hallway. "We need to talk," he said without preamble, his voice low and urgent. "Not here," she whispered, glancing around the deserted hallway. "Someone could—" "Conference room B is empty," he interrupted. "I checked." Against her better judgment, she followed him down the hall and into the small conference room overlooking the lake. The moment the door closed behind them, the careful distance they'd maintained all evening evaporated. "This is torture," Ashton said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Watching you all evening, having to pretend you're just another employee, acting like I don't know exactly how you taste when you laugh." "Ashton." His name came out breathless as he stepped closer, his familiar scent enveloping her like a warm embrace. "I know we agreed to be careful, but God, Rainey, I'm going crazy. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to watch other men flirt with you and not be able to do anything about it?" "Other men?" she echoed, confused. "Brad from accounting has been hovering around you all night. And don't get me started on the way James from marketing kept finding excuses to touch your arm during dinner." His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before, raw and possessive in a way that made her pulse quicken. The possessive edge in his voice sent heat spiraling through her, even as the rational part of her brain registered the dangerous territory they were entering. "You're jealous." "Damn right I'm jealous." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. "I want to tell every man here that you're mine. I want to hold your hand during dinner and dance with you without having to worry about office gossip or HR violations. I want to wake up with you in my arms without checking to make sure the curtains are closed tight enough." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. This wasn't just about physical attraction or forbidden romance. This was about a man who was falling as hard and fast as she was, struggling with the same impossible situation. "But we can't," she said softly, her heart breaking a little at the frustration in his voice. "You know we can't." "I know." He reached up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheek with infinite gentleness. "But that doesn't make it any easier. Sometimes I think about just walking away from all of this. The company, the responsibilities, the expectations, taking you somewhere we could just be ourselves without worrying about who's watching. You don't mean that, don't I? His grey eyes were intense, searching her face. What if I told you I'd give it all up for you, for us? The words should have thrilled her, but instead they sent a chill of fear through her system. Ashton, no, that's not what I want. I don't want you to sacrifice everything for me. Then what do you want? I want both, she said fiercely. I want you, and I want my career, and I want us to find a way to make this work without anyone having to give up who they are. The door handle rattled, and they sprang apart just as it opened to reveal Patricia Williams from HR, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. Mr. Hale, Ms. Brooks. Her tone was carefully neutral, but Rainey could see the calculation behind her gaze. I was looking for you both. The evening activities are about to begin. Of course, Ashton replied smoothly, his professional mask sliding effortlessly back into place. We were just discussing the Q4 campaign strategy. In a conference room alone with the lights dimmed, Patricia's smile was razor-sharp. How dedicated of you both. Rainey felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and something close to panic. Patricia Williams had been with the company for 15 years and had a reputation for knowing everything about everyone. If she suspected something, the lighting controls are quite sensitive, Ashton said calmly. Motion sensors. Ah, Patricia's gaze moved between them like a tennis match. Well, perhaps we could continue any business discussions tomorrow during the scheduled meetings. Tonight is supposed to be about team bonding after all. Absolutely, Rainey managed, proud that her voice came out steady. I was just heading back to the reception. As they filed out of the conference room, Patricia fell into step beside Rainey. Ms. Brooks, might I have a word? Ashton continued down the hallway, but not before shooting Rainey a look that promised they'd continue their conversation later. Rainey's stomach churned as Patricia guided her toward a quiet alcove. I'm going to speak plainly, Patricia said, her voice low and serious. Office relationships are complicated things. They require careful navigation to avoid potential issues. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Patricia's expression softened slightly. You're a valuable employee, Rainey. Talented, dedicated, well-liked by your colleagues. It would be a shame if anything were to complicate that. The warning was gentle but unmistakable. Rainey felt like she was balancing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong word away from professional disaster. I appreciate your concern, she said carefully, but I can assure you that my personal and professional lives remain completely separate. Patricia studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'm glad to hear it. Enjoy the rest of the evening. As the HR director walked away, Rainey sagged against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. They'd been careful, discreet, professional, but apparently not careful enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ashton. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning. Early. Rainey stared at the message, knowing with crystal clarity that everything was about to change. The question was whether they'd survive the storm that was coming, or whether their secret would destroy everything they'd built, both together and apart. Sometimes love means having everything to lose. Sometimes it means having everything to fight for. Dawn crept over Cascade Lodge like a hesitant promise, painting the lake in shades of rose gold and amber. Rainey hadn't slept more than an hour, her mind cycling through every possible conversation she might have with Ashton, every scenario that could unfold from Patricia's thinly veiled warning. She found him exactly where his text had said he'd be, on the dock extending into the pristine lake, dressed in running clothes with his dark hair still damp from exercise. Even facing potential professional disaster, the man looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a fitness magazine. You're early, he said as she approached, his voice carrying that familiar warmth despite the gravity of their situation. Couldn't sleep. Rainey settled beside him on the wooden bench at the dock's end, careful to maintain enough distance that they looked like colleagues having a casual conversation. You? Same. He stared out over the water, his profile sharp and beautiful in the morning light. I keep thinking about Patricia's expression when she found us. She knows. The words came out flat and certain. Maybe not details, but she knows something's happening. Ashton nodded grimly. Which means we have decisions to make. The weight of that statement settled between them like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything they'd built together. Rainey pulled her cardigan closer against the mountain air's chill, wishing she could pull certainty around herself just as easily. "What kind of decisions?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "The kind that determine whether we have a future together, or whether this ends right here, right now." His voice was steady, but she could hear the undercurrent of pain threading through his words. Rainey's heart clenched. "Ashton, no, let me finish." He turned to face her fully, those storm-grey eyes intense and focused entirely on her face. "Because I need you to understand what we're really talking about here." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "If Patricia reports her suspicions to the board, I could face censure for inappropriate workplace conduct. It would be a scandal, bad publicity for the company. The board might demand my resignation to avoid the negative attention." He paused, his jaw tightening. "And you could face worse. Accusations of sleeping your way to better assignments, questions about every promotion you've earned, whispers that would follow you for the rest of your career." The stark reality of his words hit her like cold water. She'd been so caught up in the intoxicating rush of their connection that she'd pushed the potential consequences to the back of her mind. "So, what are our options?" she whispered. "3. Ashton's voice was clinical now, like he was presenting a business proposal instead of discussing the fate of their hearts. "Option 1. We end this now. Completely. No more stolen moments, no more texts, no more pretending we can maintain professional distance while wanting each other this much." Rainey felt something shatter inside her chest at the thought, but she kept her expression neutral. "What's option 2? We come clean. Full disclosure to HR, accept whatever consequences come, and hope that my position in the company offers some protection." His laugh was bitter. "Though that's assuming the board doesn't decide I'm a liability they can't afford." And option 3. For the first time since she'd joined him on the dock, Ashton's professional mask slipped, revealing the vulnerable man underneath. "You leave Nexus Tech." The words hung in the air between them like a physical blow. Rainey stared at him, processing what he was really asking. "Leave?" she repeated. "Leave the job I've worked for years to build? The career I've put everything into? I know how it sounds. Do you?" The words came out sharper than she intended, anger flaring hot and sudden in her chest. "Because it sounds like you're asking me to sacrifice everything I've worked for while you get to keep everything you've inherited." Ashton flinched as if she'd struck him. "That's not... I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" Rainey stood abruptly, pacing to the dock's edge with her hands clenched into fists. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like when things get complicated, the woman is expected to give up her career, while the powerful man gets to continue on unchanged." "Rainey, please, no." She spun around to face him, 3 weeks of suppressed emotion finally finding its outlet. "Do you know what I went through to get where I am? The extra hours I put in to prove I belonged? The ideas I had to fight for because people assumed I was just diversity hiring? The comments I've endured? The assumptions I've had to overcome?" Ashton stood too, his face pale but determined. "I know." "No, you don't know." The words tore out of her like a dam bursting. "You inherited your position, Ashton. You walked into the corner office because your last name was on the building. I earned every single thing I have, and now you're asking me to walk away from it all for a relationship that started 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the dock posts. Ashton's expression cycled through hurt, anger, and something that looked like devastation. "You're right," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm asking you to sacrifice everything while I risk nothing. I'm asking you to trust me with your entire future based on 3 weeks of, what? Stolen moments and whispered conversations." Rainey felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Ashton, but here's what you don't understand." He stepped closer, his intensity focused entirely on her. "I'm not asking you to sacrifice your career for a fling, Rainey. I'm not asking you to give up everything for some rich guy's whim." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to trust me with your heart because you've already got mine." His voice dropped to a whisper, raw and honest. "I'm asking you to take a leap with me because I'm so completely, utterly in love with you that the thought of losing you makes it hard to breathe." The confession hit her like lightning, electric and transformative. She stared at him, seeing the truth written in every line of his face, hearing it in the tremor of his voice. "I love you too," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I love you so much it terrifies me." Relief flooded his expression, followed immediately by something that looked like hope. "Then we'll figure it out, together, whatever it takes." "How?" she asked, even as she felt herself leaning toward him like a flower toward sunlight. "How do we make this work without destroying everything we've both built?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I'd rather fight for this, for us, than walk away and spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." The morning sun climbed higher, painting the world in golden light as they stood on that dock with their hearts laid bare between them. In the distance, Rainey could hear the lodge beginning to stir. Breakfast preparations, early risers starting their day, the normal world carrying on while hers hung in the balance. "We need to be smart about this," she said finally. "Strategic. If we're going to fight for this, we need a plan." Ashton's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know I'm not giving up on us without a fight." And as they stood together facing an uncertain future, one thing became crystal clear. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The greatest victories are not won in boardrooms or corner offices. They are won in the quiet moments when two hearts decide to trust each other completely. 2 weeks later, Rainey stood outside the Nexus Tech boardroom, her heart hammering against her ribs with a rhythm that had nothing to do with caffeine and everything to do with the decision she and Ashton were about to make. The plan they'd crafted during late-night phone calls and carefully orchestrated lunch meetings was either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. But as she smoothed down her burgundy blazer, the same color she'd worn to their first dinner, she felt a calm certainty settle over her like armor. Today, they stopped hiding. Ashton emerged from the elevator looking like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored and his expression composed. But Rainey could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when their eyes met across the lobby. "Ready?" he asked quietly as they walked toward the boardroom together. "Terrified," she admitted, "but ready." The boardroom was already filled with the senior leadership team, 12 of the most powerful people in the company, including Patricia Williams, whose sharp gaze tracked their entrance like a heat-seeking missile. Rainey took her seat at the far end of the polished conference table, hyper-aware of every eye in the room. "Before we begin with today's agenda," Ashton said, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally to him, "I have an announcement to make." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia leaned forward slightly, her expression predatory and expectant. Board members exchanged glances that ranged from curious to concerned. "As you all know, Nexus Tech has always prided itself on transparency and ethical business practices," Ashton continued, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Rainey's face. "Which is why I'm informing you that I've entered into a personal relationship with Ms. Rainey Brooks from our creative department." The silence that followed was deafening. Rainey could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 12 pairs of eyes shifting between her and Ashton, with varying degrees of shock, calculation, and disapproval. Patricia was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled. "Mr. Hale, I believe we discussed the potential complications of workplace relationships. You expressed concerns," Ashton replied smoothly, "which is why Ms. Brooks and I have developed a comprehensive plan to address any potential conflicts of interest." He nodded to Rainey, who stood on legs that felt steadier than she'd expected. This was it, the moment where she either proved herself or watched her career implode in real time. "Over the past 2 weeks, I've been in negotiations with Meridian Creative Agency," Rainey began, her voice clear and confident despite the chaos in her chest. "They've offered me a position as Senior Creative Director, with primary responsibility for developing campaigns for tech sector clients." She paused, seeing the surprise ripple through the room. Even Patricia looked caught off guard. "However," Rainey continued, "I've proposed an alternative arrangement. I would like to establish Brooks Creative as an independent consulting firm, with Nexus Tech as my primary client. This would allow me to continue working on projects I'm passionate about, while eliminating any concerns about workplace impropriety." The silence that followed was different now, thoughtful rather than shocked. Board members were leaning forward, their business minds clearly engaged by the unexpected proposal. "You're proposing to go freelance?" asked Robert Chang, the chief financial officer. "I'm proposing to build something of my own," Rainey replied firmly. "Something that allows me to maintain my professional integrity while also honoring my personal choices." Ashton stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet strength that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Ms. Brooks has been one of our most valuable creative assets for 3 years," he said. "Her campaigns have increased client engagement by 47% and brought in over $12 million in new business. Losing her to a competitor because of outdated policies about personal relationships would be, frankly, a catastrophic business decision." "And if the relationship doesn't work out?" Patricia asked, her tone sharp but not entirely unsympathetic. "If personal complications affect professional performance?" Rainey and Ashton exchanged a look that said everything without words. "Then we deal with those complications like adults," Rainey said simply. "But we don't let fear of what might happen prevent us from pursuing what we both know is right." The discussion that followed was intense, professional, and surprisingly productive. Questions were raised about contract terms, conflict of interest protocols, and timeline for transition. Through it all, Rainey felt a growing sense of amazement at what they'd accomplished. They weren't just fighting for their relationship, they were revolutionizing it. 45 minutes later, the vote was unanimous. Brooks Creative would be established as an independent contractor with a 3-year exclusive agreement with Nexus Tech. Rainey would maintain her current projects while building her own client base, and all personal relationship protocols would be waived given the change in employment status. As the board members filed out, Patricia lingered, approaching Rainey with an expression that was almost impressed. "That was either the most professionally executed romantic gesture I've ever witnessed, or the most romantically motivated business decision," she said dryly. "Maybe both," Rainey suggested, unable to suppress her smile. Patricia studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You handled yourself well in there. I respect someone who's willing to fight for what they believe in." She paused. "For what it's worth, I think you two might actually make this work." When the boardroom finally emptied, leaving just Rainey and Ashton alone among the scattered papers and empty coffee cups, the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished began to settle in. "We did it," Rainey whispered, staring at the contract terms still displayed on the projection screen. "You did it," Ashton corrected, moving around the table toward her. "That was the most impressive display of professional courage I've ever witnessed." "I had good motivation," she said, meeting him halfway around the massive conference table. "Someone very wise once told me that the best risks are the ones worth taking." "Sounds like a smart guy." His smile was tender and triumphant as he reached for her hands. "Any regrets?" Rainey pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well, I'm giving up the security of a steady paycheck to start my own business. I'm entering into a relationship with a man who could buy small countries. And I just announced our personal business to 12 of the most powerful people in Seattle's tech industry." "When you put it like that, it does sound mildly insane." "Mildly?" Rainey laughed, the sound bright and free in the formal boardroom. "Ashton, 6 weeks ago I thought you were a cold, untouchable CEO who probably didn't even notice I existed. Now I'm starting my own company and planning a future with you. If that's not completely insane, I don't know what is. And yet it feels like the most sane thing I've ever done." She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I love you, Ashton Hale. Completely. Terrifyingly. Absolutely." "I love you too, Rainey Brooks," he murmured, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. Enough to change everything. When he kissed her, right there in the boardroom where they'd just rewritten the rules of their entire world, Rainey felt like she was flying. No more stolen moments, no more careful distances, no more pretending they were anything other than two people completely, irrevocably in love. And as Seattle's afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting them both in golden light, one thing became crystal clear. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the courage to rewrite the ending. 6 months later, true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself, and then building that life together, one brave choice at a time. The Seattle Space Needle gleamed against the twilight sky like a silver promise, and Rainey Brooks, now Rainey Brooks, CEO of Brooks Creative, stood on the rooftop terrace of her new downtown office building, watching the city light up like a constellation fallen to earth. 6 months. 6 months since she'd walked into that boardroom and bet everything on love and her own courage. 6 months since she'd chosen to build something of her own, rather than sacrifice what she'd already built. 6 months since she and Ashton had rewritten the rules of what was possible when two people decided to fight for each other instead of fighting against the world. "Beautiful view," came a familiar voice behind her, warm with the kind of affection that still made her heart skip beats. Rainey turned to find Ashton approaching, with 2 glasses of champagne, looking devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that made his grey eyes look like storm clouds kissed by starlight. Even after all this time, the sight of him still took her breath away, not just because he was beautiful, but because of the way he looked at her, like she was something miraculous that he couldn't quite believe was real. "It is beautiful," she agreed, accepting the champagne and settling into his arms like coming home. "Hard to believe this is actually mine." Brooks Creative had exceeded every projection, every hope, every dream she'd dared to harbor. 3 major clients beyond Nexus Tech, a team of 4 brilliant creatives, and a reputation that was already drawing attention from companies across the Pacific Northwest. She'd built something that was entirely hers, something that bore her name and her vision. "You earned every bit of this," Ashton murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I have to admit, I'm a little jealous of how much time you spend here." "Says the man who once worked 18-hour days," Rainey laughed, tilting her head back to look at him. "Besides, someone taught me that the best risks are worth taking." Smart guy. The smartest. She turned in his arms, her hands settling on his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heart. "Though he's gotten a lot more relaxed lately. I hear he's been delegating more, taking actual lunch breaks, leaving the office before 9 p.m. What can I say? I have good motivation to come home." His smile was soft and private, the smile he saved just for her. Speaking of which, he reached into his pocket, and Rainey's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box that seemed to hold all the promise in the world. "Ashton," she whispered, "6 months ago you took the biggest risk of your life on a man you'd known for 3 weeks, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You trusted me with your heart, your future, your dreams. You chose to build something beautiful instead of letting fear tear down what we'd found." He dropped to one knee on the rooftop terrace, the city sparkling around them like a benediction, and Rainey felt tears spring to her eyes. Rainey Brooks, brilliant entrepreneur, fearless risk-taker, the woman who changed my entire world with a joke about coffee machines. "Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire that caught the city lights and threw them back like captured stars. But it was the look in Ashton's eyes that made her knees weak, the vulnerability and hope and absolute certainty she saw there. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her hand, and when Ashton stood to kiss her, the whole world seemed to shimmer with possibility. They were no longer the cautious woman and guarded man who'd circled each other in corporate hallways, stealing glances and wondering what if. They were partners, equals, 2 people who'd chosen to build a life together, despite every obstacle the world had thrown in their way. "I love you," Rainey said against his lips, the words carrying all the weight of everything they'd overcome and everything they still had to discover together. "I love you too," he replied, "enough to spend the rest of my life proving it." As they stood together on that rooftop, Seattle glittering beneath them and the future stretching out ahead like an unwritten love song, Rainey realized something profound. Sometimes the best love stories don't begin with certainty. They begin with courage. The courage to be vulnerable when vulnerability seems dangerous. The courage to trust when trust feels impossible. The courage to build something new instead of clinging to something safe. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman hiding her feelings behind professional distance, convinced that love and career couldn't coexist. Tonight, she was an engaged entrepreneur who'd learned that the right person doesn't ask you to choose between your dreams. They help you build bigger ones. "What are you thinking about?" Ashton asked, watching her face in the reflected glow of the city lights. How a joke about coffee machines led to this, she said, lifting her hand to watch her engagement ring catch the light. How one moment of embarrassment turned into the greatest love story of my life. Our life, he corrected gently. This is our story, Rainey, and we're just getting started. She looked up at him. This man who'd seen her at her most awkward and fallen in love anyway, who'd fought for them when fighting seemed impossible, who'd supported her dreams, even when those dreams meant changing everything they'd planned. Ready to write the next chapter, she asked. With you? Ashton smiled, that devastating smile that had started it all. I'm ready for everything. Final message. Love is the most beautiful risk we can take. It asks us to be vulnerable, to trust, to believe in something bigger than ourselves. Rainey and Ashton's story reminds us that real love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for, worth growing with, worth building a future alongside. Their journey from that embarrassing moment at the coffee machine to this rooftop engagement teaches us that sometimes our most mortifying mistakes can become our most beautiful beginnings. Sometimes the love that scares us most is exactly the love that will transform our lives in ways we never imagined possible. In a world that often tells us we have to choose between professional success and personal happiness, Rainey and Ashton chose to create a third option, building a life where both could flourish. They remind us that with the right partner, we don't have to sacrifice our dreams, we get to expand them. Their story is proof that love at its best makes us braver, stronger, more generous versions of ourselves. It challenges us to take risks, to be honest about what we want, and to fight for the relationships that make us feel most alive. Because at the end of the day, the greatest victories aren't measured in boardrooms or bank accounts. They're measured in the quiet moments when two hearts choose each other, again and again, no matter what obstacles stand in their way. Your participation means so much to our story community. We'd love to hear from you. If you were in Rainey's position, facing the choice between a secure job and an uncertain future with the person you love, what would you do? Would you have had the courage to start your own business and fight for love at the same time? Thank you for joining Rainey and Ashton on their journey. May their story inspire you to take the beautiful risks that lead to the most extraordinary love. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.